The link, you know how to find the link just by going to the Sohba website, Sohba YouTube. Otherwise, I can find it for you, and we got it. Yeah, it should just.
If you're going live.
Yes, we are officially live. All right. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulihi wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. All right, today's session of the Empowered Muslim Woman is going to be about fasting, and particularly the rules related to women's fasting. Okay, so a couple of points we're going to go through is connected to our menses, coming before, in the middle, at the end of a fasting day. We have also the fiqh connected to pregnancy and nursing and makeup fasts and things of that nature. Okay, so the very first thing, and we'll touch on to some topics that would encompass the entire fiqh of fasting for men and women, because we have to understand those as well. But for the majority of that, you guys can tune into Sheikh Abdullah's class tomorrow, inshallah, which is the fiqh of fasting, official, beginning to end. So to begin, the first things first is, because Ramadan has not started, we have to think about Ramadan makeup fasts. Okay. So we're going to make this a little bit more interactive because we got a smaller number of folks. So who keeps track of the days that they have not fasted in a very particular way? How many days they haven't fasted? They know it. They have it either really in a great memory box in their head, or they've written it down. Okay, good. One of you. Somewhat. Okay, so it's in a slightly vague memory box. Or maybe it's just, I typically miss 7 or 8 days, and so I'll make 7 or 8 days up. Okay, so the first things I always recommend, it's not like a scholarly fatwa, but this is a Safiya recommendation. Write it down. Write it down. It becomes so difficult to remember, and especially when you're there, month of Sha'ban, and you're like, oh my gosh, I forgot. I need to make these up. It would be really helpful to know exactly how many, because when we're working with a month, which has 7 or 8 or more days gone that we can't fast, we have to have really calculated out, how am I going to make up those 7, 8, 9 or more in this month when there's 7, 8, or 9 that I cannot fast. So first things first is, I always highly recommend to write it down. Why? Because fasting is a dain. It is in the Arabic language, a debt that has to be paid. When we pass away with fasts that were not made up, that debt still rolls over. And so the scholars say that if you had, for example, 25 fasts that you had not made up, and you pass away, your family or anybody on your behalf, but typically your family, would be obligated to pay that dain on your behalf. Not pay, by the way, fast. So if you passed away and you had 25 fasts left over, then your spouse, your children, your parents could divvy it up, and they'd have to make up for those fasts. And this is unanimously agreed upon by the scholars. It is something that is a debt, and it has to be made up, right? Hajj is a debt that and we have the analogy from Hajj. If a person had the means to go to Hajj and they passed away, their child can pay that debt on their behalf by doing Hajj on their behalf, because a woman came to the Prophet ﷺ and asked that. My father did not make Hajj, and the Prophet ﷺ said, would you pay back a debt if he had one? She said yes. So he said, so you have to act upon this, and she made Hajj on his behalf. Hajj is slightly different because he had to have had the physical and financial means, all of the means to be able to. But for fasting, you either have the physical means to do it, and so therefore the debt has to be paid in making up the fast, or you didn't have the physical means to do it, therefore the debt has to be made up in the fidya. Either way, it has to be made up. So that's why I always recommend write it down. On my phone, for example, I've let my husband know in the notes part of the iPhone, it says fasts. Look it up. When I pass away, make sure that someone makes those up on my behalf, right? And that's not too much for those of us who are looking at like 7 days every year, and we got to make them up. But that it absolutely is a lot for those who have other circumstances, whether there was illness or whether there was nursing or pregnancy or any sort of situation that meant we missed a whole Ramadan, 30 days. And then another whole Ramadan, 30 days, and another whole Ramadan. It's not something light to be taken. It is something that is a debt. And if a debt is not paid, there is punishment for that, right? So we want to make sure that this is something we think really strongly about. So if you come away from this thinking about what's the first action item, is just write it down. Write it down somewhere where other people know where to find it. Okay. If you do not make up your fasts by the next Ramadan, so the obligation is to make them up by the next Ramadan. Is the obligation to make them up immediately? No. So first Ramadan, let's say Ramadan 2023 ended, you have 7 fasts to make up. Are you obligated to immediately make it up? No. Why? How do we know that answer? Because Aisha radiallahu anha said in a narration, I used to make up my fasts in Sha'ban because I used to be busy with things for the Prophet ﷺ throughout the year. So she's just like, I was busy. I had things to do. There were other things that I was taking care of. And the month of Sha'ban is when I really set aside my time to make up all of these fasts. That's the month right before Ramadan. That also just gives us a little insight in the humanness of them. It's like, yeah, there is this reality that you get busy and you sort of forget and you come back to it and say, okay, I need to make it up right now. So that she made it up often in Sha'ban, it just gives us that allowance that you have the full 11 months to make it up. Now, there's a difference of opinion on Sha'wal, and we'll talk about that maybe at the end. So someone come back to Sha'wal because we want to come like full circle at the end. We'll talk about Sha'wal. Okay, but typically you've got 11 months to make it up, and what Allah has made vast, don't constrict it. So you have 11 months to make it up. But say it is 2 days before Ramadan, which is where we're at. We're actually 1 day in between now and Ramadan. And you're like, oh, I have 5 fasts I have to make up. Did I have an excuse throughout the last 11 months? If yes, then you're in a different category, and we'll talk about that. But if no, I really didn't have an excuse over the last 11 months. I really just kind of forgot, or I just miscalculated and thought it was just a couple, but then my period came, so then I didn't have the opportunity to. Then that person has to still make those up after next Ramadan, but pay the penalty. And the penalty is the fidya. So the fidya is a payment given for those who typically missed their fast in Ramadan out of illness or out of a certain reason. But it also comes for the person who was unable to make it up for these 11 months. So if I was to give the example of 7 days, 7 days I was supposed to fast. Next Ramadan came around. I didn't have any valid excuse of why I didn't make it up. I've got 7 days of fidya to pay, and I should try to pay it as soon as I realize, and that the next Ramadan has started. And fidya is feeding a person a full day's meal. And so scholars have calculated all sorts of different ways. 1 year I looked at it and it was like about like, $10. And I just saw Sheikh Joe's Instagram ask me anything, and he said $3. So look at what the local scholarship is saying, but typically it's to feed a person a full day's meal, which means like at least 2 full meals. That's what the scholars say. So if you were to feed a person a full day's meal of rice and chicken, maybe lunch and dinner, you might be looking at about $10. And so some have made it less because they're saying, well, it's just rice, for example, that's what it's based upon, and so that would be a lot less. So look at local scholarship and what they have deemed as the fidya. Typically it's going to be a little bit less than zakatul fitr, right? So zakatul fitr is a certain amount, and I think it's like $12, about $12, $13. It changes every year with inflation, right? But it's going to be less than that. Okay. Typically, I think what Sheikh Joe had said is it's a quarter of what zakatul fitr, right? Very different from what I've heard. If it doesn't harm you, then you know, go with that higher number, and 10 times 7, for example, is $70. It's not just money you give to a random pool of money. You can't just be like $70 put into the general sadaqah of the masjid. No, it's specifically money that has to be given to feed a poor person their meal. So my recommendation is either truly find like a person who is homeless, who's looking for food, and you give them enough, maybe food for their meal, right? Or go to an organization that gives you a fidya drop down box, okay? Because then you know that they are going to give money, they're taking that money to give food to the poor, right? So places like Islamic Relief, Helping Hands, or you know, whatever website that you're using, whatever charity that you're using, you'll often find they have a fidya drop down box. You know, then it's specifically going to the right cause. So it's not just money and charity, it's specifically money given to, it's specifically food given to poor, which means you need to make sure that your money is going to the right location and to the right destination. Okay, so that's the very first thing, is make sure you're making up your fast in those 11 months, or that if you do not make them up, that's a pretty not a good thing, right? You've done something that is outside of what we're supposed to do. So pay that fidya as an expiation and make sure you still make those up. So keep those on your record. It's not wiped away by the payment, not for the one who was able to make it up. Okay, so let's go to some general understandings about fasting. Fasting is obligated upon Muslimun aqilun balighun. That is a Muslim, someone in the fold of Islam. Aqilun, someone who is of sound mind. Balighun, someone who has reached the age of puberty. Okay, that's pretty much the three prerequisites for a fast to be counting, or for someone to be liable for fasting. Within that category, we have people who are exempt. Okay, so let's make this interactive. Who is exempt? There's an ayah in the Quran that tells us a couple of people who are exempt. Might be a temporary exemption, might be a permanent exemption, or a long, prolonged illness. Okay, so whoever was ill, old age, I'm putting it in a different category. Okay, so illness, old age, pregnancy. Okay, let's see where it goes. They differ, right? But let's just put pregnancy as a temporary thing. Yes. Traveling. Okay. Breastfeeding. Okay.
You have to say
Yes, for prayer. For most actions, the pen is lifted for the person who is not of sane mind, right? And the scholars differentiate what is of sane mind.
Postpartum and
okay, right. So you would not fast in the times you would not pray, like during your menstruation period or during the fast, postpartum bleeding. Okay. Okay, good. Anything else? Okay, we've covered them all, but they all have slightly different rulings. For the traveler, it is during their travel, right? As a Muslim, we are not supposed to intentionally travel in Ramadan so that we don't have to fast, right? Look at your intention. What are you doing? If you are like, you know what, I was thinking of a 30-day vacation starting March 11th, ending April 11th, you would be liable, blameworthy, if you didn't fast that entire month because you have purposefully chosen those days to fast, to travel.
a key question regarding traveling. But this is where I get a little confused, because it says during your travel. And in that time, travel was a lot in caravans that would take like 24 hours to 48 days to get somewhere. But our travel time has been shortened to a plane ride that can maybe be 4 hours. And once you get to a location, technically your travel is over. So
Yeah.
does it include that visitation portion? Like, I know for Salah it's like 14 days. But like,
You know, I need to look into that.
okay. Like technically once you reach your location, you can start fasting again.
So let's say for sure it's during the travel is when you can break the fast. And for them, travel meant all of that time moving,
at
even if the movement took 7 days. It took 7 days to travel from, say, Mecca to this other city. All of that is considered travel, absolutely. The travel prayer has different rules when you reach a destination and how long you stay in that destination. And that's where I need to think about I need to actually research about the travel fast in a destination where you are actually staying put for a number of days, right? And I would imagine that the rule is different. Allah knows best. That's a Sheikh Abdullah question for tomorrow.
Get off track, but kind of just point. So in the event that you do opt to fast, because this has happened where even if you're traveling, within the United States with different time zone.
Yeah.
Do you adopt, I guess when it's our time is then, and that's your breaking off point, just like it is sunset there, or I guess when you're like in an actual, you don't really know what point you're traveling, or you're going at a different time. How do you just do the best you can, or?
You do the best you can, but you are breaking based on where you are physically, right? So, for example, we are traveling to Umrah, inshallah, on Monday. On Monday at 6:30, we get into the plane and we have to break at 7:30. I'm going to assume that's still an okay time because 1 hour's travel is not really moving me to the opposite side of the world, right? But in the middle of that day, we have like 18 hours of travel. We've recommended all of our folks to just take the rukhsa, right? The concession of not fasting, because one, traveling has safar has some suffering. So traveling has some suffering. And if Allah's given you that rukhsa, why not take it? As Umar radiallahu anhu asked the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, like, he was like, we're strong. Why do we have to, shorten our prayers when traveling? And why are there all these concessions? Like, we're strong. Aren't we Muslims? We're strong. We should be stronger than that. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, why reject a gift of Allah if he gives it to you? Right? So he wasn't obligating him to not fast, to break the fast. So when it comes to travel fast, you might fast. You may fast. You have the option to fast, and you fast based on where you are presently in the sky, and that's hard to determine. So that's why it's maybe better not to fast. But if you do fast, right, and it ends up being a really short fast or a really long fast, that's fine. That's fine. Even your fast might be shortened to 6 hours because of the way you're moving, or elongated to 24 hours because of the way you're moving. That's permitted. Your fast is accepted, inshallah, and it's an obligation of that day done. But if you decided not to fast and you broke your fast, absolutely no sin on that person. They just have to make it fi iddatun ukhra, in a different time period, right after that Ramadan. Okay, so traveling, during the travel, you absolutely can and cannot fast. It's up to you. Okay. Sickness, you may break the fast. You start the day and you feel ill at a certain point in the day. It's not illness that's like, oh, I feel a little cough coming on. It has to be illness that would make you feel like this sickness is going to render it difficult for me to fast, right? So you have to be the judge of that. I cannot, a scholar can't come and say like you are sick enough to fast or not sick enough to fast when it's something internally happening in your body. What I would say is Allah knows, right? And if you're feeling ill, take the rukhsa, take the concession, because fasting might exacerbate a sickness even more, right? And I know that I remember fasting we probably all remember those times where we fasted and we're like, it's just a little bit of an illness, and then you're like exhausted and done, and you can't even do normal things you're regularly able to do. And it was because you were still fasting while being ill and you didn't take the gift that Allah gave you, right? And for me, when that happens, then that sickness lasts longer. And so now, instead of taking the rukhsa that day and taking the medication and getting all those fluids and rest, I have now made myself actually miss the next 3 days of fasting because I just got even more ill. So take the gift when Allah gives it to you, but you do have to assess. That's your own personal ijtihad. Am I ill enough to not fast? If you're feeling too ill, go ahead and break the fast. So that is the ill and the traveler. Okay, those are the ones talked about in the ayah. When it comes to pregnancy, nursing, and those who are of old age, the one talked about in the Quran directly are those who لا تطيقون, those who are unable to. They have the inability to fast. Those people are also given a rukhsa. The rukhsa of the people who are unable to fast outside of illness and outside of traveling, they're just given this category of just unable to fast. They can make those up if they have the ability later, or they can just pay the fidya. So then the scholars discussed who comes under this category of those who are just unable to within the ayah. And so the elderly is one that was agreed upon. The elderly who feel like by fasting, I will become so weak and I will, I won't be able to really do much in the day. They've been given this rukhsa. Even if a doctor does not consider them ill, but fasting does bring about so much lethargy and fatigue in their body just by nature of being older and their body working differently. They're under a category mentioned in the Quran, those who are unable to. So those who are ill, those who are traveling, and those who are unable to. The elderly come under that category. The terminally ill absolutely come under both categories, right? That they are ill and they are chronically or terminally ill, that they wouldn't even be able to make it up over the next 11 months. They and the elderly get the category of just pay the fidya and you don't have to fast. So the entire 30 days of Ramadan, they pay the fidya. They can either pay it then at the beginning of the Ramadan, maybe they pay it at the end of Ramadan, maybe they pay it every day. Either way is fine. They are exempt. The terminally chronically ill or the one who is unable to because of old age, right? So the question then became, what about pregnant and nursing women? Do they fall under any of these categories? If they are ill, yeah, they fall under the category of illness. Your doctor says, no, this is a really tough pregnancy for you. And by fasting, you're only going to suffer more. Your doctor says, no, you go ahead and take the rukhsa out of illness. I will not fast these 30 days, right? And that's fine. You do make them up, but we'll talk about that in a moment. As for the nursing person as well, if the woman is nursing and the doctor says, look, if you don't fast in this, if you do fast, there's going to be some illness that is caused for you or for the child. And so you must eat and you must drink and you must keep up your supply for this child. These are considered okay, right? These are reasons that you can take the rukhsa. What about the person who has been pregnant 1 year, nursing the next, pregnant 1 year, nursing the next. And now they have year after year. And then what's in between is they're still nursing, right? Or they're still pregnant, right? So think of someone who has back-to-back 3-4 pregnancies. Because this is something that happens today. And this was something that happened at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. We have an opinion outside of the majority opinion, which is the opinion of Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu and Abdullah ibn Umar, which, by the way, Ibn Abbas is known as one of the faqihs of Medina. He is the cousin of the Prophet ﷺ and known to have a lot of understanding of the religion. And Abdullah ibn Umar, the son of Umar ibn al-Khattab, they both said that when a woman became pregnant or that she was nursing, they would ask the question, should we fast? They would just say, just pay the fidya. They wouldn't say, and make it up. They'd say, just pay the fidya. And they considered nursing and pregnancy in general to come under the category of those who are unable to, because they saw it as a continuous cycle. Someone's in that era of their life where they are pregnant and nursing and pregnant and nursing. How can they even make it up? And so their opinion, which is the minority opinion, is these women, just by virtue of being pregnant or nursing, off the hook, don't have to fast at all, and don't have to make those up either. They just pay the fidya, right? And so the scholars, then the majority opinion is she still has to make it up, right? She still has to make those up. That's the majority opinion, because this is an opinion of the Sahaba, and there is weight to that, because where did the Sahaba get their information or make their rulings? Based on what they understood from the Quran and Sunnah. But because there's no direct hadith or indication from the Quran that the pregnant and the nursing woman would not make it up, then the majority say she does make it up. Okay, she does make it up. So let me give you some examples. a woman is pregnant last Ramadan. And so for those 30 days, she consults with her doctor and her doctor says, no, it's not going to be good for you to fast. Or she tried it out. She tried it out the first day and she felt really sick and she was very nauseous and it was not a good day for her. She felt ill and maybe she had some fear for the child. Either one of those are an acceptable reason for her not to fast. So she's missed 30 days, right? And she's got a pregnancy that lasts 9 months. And so she goes entirely through the next 9 months, not being able to fast still. She still feels some amount of illness, or she feels like I don't have the energy to make these up. Then she gives birth and now she's nursing her child for the next maybe 2 years. Imagine that. That's a long period. That's one Ramadan. That's the next Ramadan. That's the next Ramadan. So you can understand why Ibn Abbas and Abdullah bin Umar were like, you're pregnant? That's it. You're good. Just pay the fidya. There's too many that go into this for you to make it up. And it is a rahmah that they have this opinion. As Ibn Qudama said that إجماع الصحابة حجة قاطعة واختلافهم رحمة واسعة. That the agreement of the Sahaba on a certain issue is a definitive evidence. It's like it's a clear evidence. You take it like the Prophet ﷺ saying, if all the Sahaba agree on something, we gotta stay clear. We have to either stay clear of that if they stay clear of it, or we have to definitely act upon that if they say act upon it, because where are they getting this information? From the Prophet ﷺ. But if they disagree, he said, it is a rahmatun wasi'ah, a wide, vast mercy. It is what makes Islam so beautiful, that there are differences of opinion, and that exists in many different spheres. We talked about them in so many different spheres of women's fiqh, but there is that opinion. So the scholars say, if you're somebody who is able to fast during your pregnancy in Ramadan, then fast it. If you're someone who's not able to, but after those few months of Ramadan, you find yourself able to, then go ahead and make up those fasts. But if you find yourself in that category of pregnancy, nursing, and you've got many years, take the opinion of Ibn Abbas and Abdullah ibn Umar and pay the fidya. Because imagine the feeling of, if we said this is a debt, that if you die upon, someone has to pay it, and you have 4 years worth of fast to make up. That is 30 times 4, that is 120. And you're sitting there and you're still, you're at 120 and it's sitting there on your Google Notes. Okay, I got a year ahead of me, and there's still, your period still comes, and there's days you cannot do. You would imagine that you'd be fasting like half the year before you get to the next year. And so what the scholars have said is, if you're in that category of so many, take the rukhsa, take the opinion, the minority opinion, and pay the fidya. If you're able to, then they say that make it up. So say I'm not in that category of 120 days. I'm in the category of 30 days, Ramadan missed through pregnancy. And then I was able to fast when the next year when I was nursing. So I've got 30 to make up. Are you required to make it up before the next year? Typically, yes. But if there is hardship, the scholars mention specifically for pregnant and nursing women, just try your best to get what you can do throughout the year. And then the next year, try your best to do more throughout the next year. And the next year, try to do as many as you can. So for me personally, I think I took 5 years. One pregnancy, one set of nursing, it took me 5 years. But I did that Monday and Thursday fast, those 3 days of the month where the moon, we have the full moon, 13, 14, 15, and slowly worked through all of those pregnancy and nursing days, and got to when he was 5, like that celebration of I finally finished. You're 5 years old. It's been 5 years till I made up those fasts. Imagine if you felt that weight, and it was not 1 child, but 3 or 4 or 5, and it took you another 5 years and another 5 years. So those opinions exist. You can only pay the fidya. You can pay the fidya and make up those fasts, or you can just make up those fasts. And Allah knows best. In my case, yeah. Oh, when you make up fasts, it can be any time in those 11 months. Yes, very important question. Niyyah. Okay, so let's see if we don't have any more questions about this, we'll jump into the niyyah. Okay, anybody have any more questions? Yes. Yes, so makeup fast can be done any day, except for the days that are not allowed to fast. Like we're not allowed to fast on Eid day, Eid al-Fitr, we're not allowed to fast the full of Eid al-Adha. So there's a few days that you're absolutely not allowed to fast. Outside of that, a makeup, just like a makeup prayer, can be done at any time, even if it's a generally not allowed, you're generally forbidden to pray. So for example, there should be no prayer after Fajr. You pray Fajr and you shouldn't have any prayer. But say you're like, oh my gosh, I missed Fajr yesterday. You pray today's Fajr and you're making up the next Fajr right after that Fajr. Technically a forbidden time. Makeup prayers are like, as soon as you remember it, you do it. Fasts are not the same way. It's not as soon as you remember it, you do it. But you may make up a makeup fast on a day that typically you would have had to do more than one. So the Prophet ﷺ said, don't isolate Friday as a day of fasting because that's our day of celebration, Yomul Jumu'ah. But you want to make up your fast, you may make it up on a Friday. That's okay. But don't specify like every Friday I'm going to make up fast because now you're going in the direction of what the Prophet ﷺ said to stay away from, to make Friday specifically a makeup fast. But say you happen to want to make up a makeup fast, that's fine. Friday is okay. You don't have to do Saturday. It might be good to also do Saturday, but you do not have to. Okay. Okay, as for niyyah, niyyah is important when it comes to fasting. According to all scholars, niyyah is necessary for the fast to be accepted, and intention. So typically the scholars say you should know from the night before. If it's a fard fast, it absolutely has to be from before the fast starts. Okay, so that's why they say the night before. So Ramadan fasts are coming up, March 11th through April 10th, inshallah. The Maliki madhab gives you an easy way to make this intention. They said one intention entails all of Ramadan. Because what is intention but you in your mind deciding, I'm going to do this for this purpose, right? So they said, you know Ramadan is there. Every day that you wake up, you know it's because you're fasting Ramadan and you know it's for the sake of Allah. You're not eating just because you're on a diet, right? So when the Maliki madhab makes it easy for us, says one Ramadan intention suffices the entire Ramadan, right? The other madhab say no, it has to be an intentional thought that you have before you fast, right? Like you wake up in the morning and you're like, I'm fasting, right? Or even in your mind, you're like, it's Ramadan, I'm fasting. If you just happen to not eat because you weren't hungry and then midday you're like, oh my gosh, it's Ramadan, I should be fasting, that's problematic according to them, right? Because then you just happen to be fasting from not eating. So making an intention every day is important. You want to go with the easier opinion, then make an intention from even right now, I'm going to fast the entire month of Ramadan. You're good for the entire month. This is very important though. It's easy to keep track of that intention in Ramadan. It's very important for makeup fast. You have to have the intention for an obligatory makeup fast before the fast starts. For a nafil fast, you don't have to have an intention up until midday. So one day the Prophet ﷺ was not doing a nafil fast. He just happened to not eat that day, right? He wakes up, they prayed Fajr, he didn't eat anything. It's almost about to be Dhuhr time. He comes into the home and he says, is there food? Aisha radiallahu anha says, no, there's not. And he says, Ana sa'im. Okay, so then I am fasting today, right? So he did not eat the entire day, but now he started the intention of fast by that midday point. So the fiqh ruling is up until midpoint of the day, like before Dhuhr, you can make an intention to fast and it's valid so long as you haven't eaten all day. But you have all that time to make that intention.
So that fast starts maybe and half day, like I'm just gonna fast today. They haven't made the intention. That fast will not fall under the category of your makeup day.
Correct.
Okay, because I had heard something that let's say you fasted in the days of Sha'wal and like they were the nafil fast. People say that, oh, but you have to do your makeup first. You can't have the intention of nafil first. So
We'll talk about Sha'wal in a moment. We'll talk about Sha'wal. Because Sha'wal has different, there are multiple opinions on that. If we're talking specifically about fard fast, you need to have intended that before the fast began. Before the fast even began, you had to have intended. The night before, I'm thinking, I have to make up my fast from last Ramadan. I'm going to do it tomorrow. And really, it kind of trips me up sometimes because I'm like, did I make my intention? So I remember before I started making up my makeup fast, which I made up in this last month, like Aisha radiallahu anha. So I had thought to myself, I have to make up these makeup fasts. And I went and I traveled somewhere for a few days, so I definitely wasn't going to make it up. And I thought to myself, I definitely want to start fasting when I come back from travel. I came back from travel Wednesday, and the next morning, Thursday, half the day goes by because I don't like to eat breakfast in the morning. And I'm like, oh, I was supposed to make up my fast. I didn't make the intention. I couldn't fast that day. I couldn't consider it a makeup obligatory fast day. I could have continued fasting and it would have been enough, but I definitely did eat after that because I was like, I got like 6 more days to go to fast. So that's really important, is you can't just think about like one day within this, next couple days, I should fast, I want to fast. It has to be a clear intention, right? So from that night, or maybe even at that moment, I was like, next 6 days, I'm fasting. All right, next 6 days, I'm making up my fast, and that's good enough. But all of my thoughts previous were just, it'd be good if I can consider thinking about making up my fast soon, right? So it has to be very intentional when it comes to fard fasts. Okay, as for a fast that you do in a state of impurity, that you start the day off in a state of impurity, this is actually permissible. Okay, what does that mean? Anybody got an idea what that means? Talking about janaba, you were in a state of menses and you had not made your ghusl. Sorry, janaba is in a state of sexual impurity after intercourse and you had not made ghusl, or a state of haid, menses, and you had not made your ghusl. So let's give a scenario. Fajr starts. Anybody know? I don't know with daylight savings. Fajr is gonna be an official 6. Let's say it's an official 6:30 start. So typically, you would imagine that. If it is, today is Saturday, I want to fast tomorrow, Sunday. I need to have made sure that my menses are clear. I figure that out by Isha. I'm like, you know what? I'm not entirely sure if I'm clear, but by Fajr, I should know, right? This entire night of dryness will definitely make me clear. So I'm going to wake up early. I'm going to make my ghusl so I can fast on Sunday, right? Actually, it's permitted that if you happen to wake up at 7, right? 7 o'clock hits and you see the alarm and you're like, oh my gosh, I missed suhoor, right? Had you made the intention the night before? Yes, you said, I'm going to ghusl and I'm going to fast. So your intention was made, so you're good. But you did not make a ghusl before Fajr started, still good. You make your ghusl immediately, you pray your Fajr, do not eat suhoor because suhoor time has passed, right? But you can fast that day. And if it's an obligatory fasting day, like a day of Ramadan, you have to fast that day. So you don't have the excuse of, oh, but I hadn't made ghusl by 6:30, but you were clear before 6:30 because you knew that in your mind. You said, I'm going to give it a couple more hours, by 6, I'll check. You check at 6 and you're clear. That's an obligatory day of fasting for you. Because think about it, that day you're fully clear, that day you're fully pure. There's actually no reason for you not to fast. It's sinful for you not to fast that day. So you have to be really clear about what you're looking at in your intentions with the ending days of your period. Okay. And where do we have the evidence that the Prophet ﷺ was in a state of janaba? He was in a state of janaba, meaning sexual impurity, and Fajr had already come in, and he went ahead and ghusled after Fajr Adhan has come in, and he fasted that day, which meant that before Fajr Adhan came, he was in a state of janaba. And even after Fajr Adhan came, he was in a state of janaba until he got out of that state. He ghusled and then he prayed Fajr and he was fasting that day. Okay, so that is permitted even within the days of Ramadan, right? Even within the days of Ramadan to have made a ghusl after the time of Fajr has started, and that day counts. Okay, what about if the fast, the period appears 5 minutes before Maghrib? What do you guys think?
It broke.
It broke. If you looked, it broke. If you knew. If you know, then it broke. And I'm not saying if you look, don't look. I'm saying that Islamic fiqh is based on evidence, right? Evidence comes from our senses. Senses are what we smell, taste, see, but also what we feel, right? So if 5 minutes before Maghrib and it is the day your period is supposed to start and you feel that you have started, you've started, right? And if 5 minutes before Maghrib, you happen to use the restroom and you see that it has started, it has started. So feeling or seeing means it has started and it has started. What do I mean by feeling? It's that you know, naturally we feel it come, but you're like, I can't be sure, right? And I don't want to look. But then after Maghrib, you look and you see it, right? So what you felt was evidence enough, right? What you felt was evidence enough. And there can be times where we think we feel and then actually nothing came, and then you're good because you don't actually have the evidence of seeing it, right? It was just phantom menses, I guess.
I have a couple questions. First, I understand from a fifth standpoint and from a makeup standpoint that fast would need to be but is there anything in the books about like the reward that you get for having the niyyah and having, it may not be the obligatory, but I'm just wondering if there's anything in the books that it was reported that, you still get rewarded for having the intention or doing a good deed, even if it's general.
That is a good question. So some scholars have discussed this. So what if you did fast the entire day? Fasting is not an easy thing. Imagine it's like your first day of fasting. We know how terrible and difficult that is. We did our entire day of fasting, and then it ended up being an invalid day of fasting because 5 minutes before our period came. There's two elements to ibadah, even prayer. Fasting and prayer, they have two elements. Most things have two elements. There is the obligation being fulfilled, and then there's the reward in that. The Prophet ﷺ said about the fast that Allah is not in need of your fast if you're going to lie and backbite and use your mouth to do terrible things. So what the scholars have said is, the understanding is the obligation of that fast is actually fulfilled. If you fasted the whole day, but you were just like really mean to somebody, your obligation is taken care of and it's done, but you're not sure if you gain the reward of that fast. Right? And so there's two pieces to everything. There's the obligation fulfillment and the reward. Even Umar radiallahu anhu used to ask about his prayers. Like, but how many was that prayer accepted? It was said to him, yes, it has been fulfilled. But he said, but how many of our prayers actually have reward in them? Meaning there's still two elements. Yeah, you prayed. You did Allahu Akbar to Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah with all of the arkan, all of the pillars of prayer. But was there reward in it? Allahu A'lam. Only Allah knows, right? And you might know, right? And Shaitan might know. He's like, I got that person. But when it comes to fasting, same way, you intended to fast, you did your best, you went through the whole day, except for the last 5 minutes, and you fasted entirely. Allah knows the effort you put in there. And with anything you intend, you get the full reward of it. Isn't that true? Prophet ﷺ said, anybody who intends to do a good but is prevented from it still gets the reward for it. So we imagine that, inshallah, for all those days, or that 1 minute right before, those 5 minutes right before, or even, an hour right before, we find that that fast is invalid. The obligation is not fulfilled, but we have hope in Allah that the reward was given because we had a sincere intention and we put a lot of effort in. لا نضيء أجر من أحسن عملا. Allah says, we do not waste any good that anyone does. None of it is to go to waste.
And then likewise, the inverse is not true, where if you make wusul, like you didn't start the fast because you were on period, you are able to make wusul in between, let's say Dhuhr and Asr. You are just obligated to make your prayers, but then you don't fast until the next day because you didn't have the intention and you couldn't do the rest of
Yeah.
your part.
Okay, so you find yourself on your menses and it ends at Dhuhr, and now you make your ghusl. Your prayer is obligatory upon you, but that day of fasting is missed, right? So some scholars I've even read said it is of good etiquette to fast the rest of the day, but we don't have any evidence for it, right? We don't have evidence for it. And that's just, like out of the etiquette of, everyone else is fasting around you. You're not actually in a category of someone who can't fast technically in those moments, but there's no evidence to say we must like start fasting at that point because that obligation is not able to be fulfilled that day. Yes.
So this is a question that my friend always has with, like, argument with her mom, but it's like, cause the cultural background is that if you started your period in the middle of the day while you're fasting, you still need to finish fasting that day. Like, you can't eat, you can't break your fast. Like, if your fast is broken, but you can't.
Mm,
So the question is, you're allowed to eat once your period. Okay, correct.
correct. You're allowed to eat and you should break the fast. In fact, you should to show the difference between I'm fasting and I'm not fasting, you break the fast. Sort of like when women were not women, when people were told there are 3 days of mourning after the deceased, women would call for the tlib, the yellow color, and they would say, it's the 3rd day. Put the yellow on my face, put the yellow on my hands to show I'm out of a state of mourning, to show I'm out of one state and in another state. And so it is, we are supposed to break the fast when we hit our menses hit in the middle of the day. Now, as for the etiquette, again, scholars will say it's better to eat in private so as to not like tempt other people around you. However, there is this idea within our culture, which the scholars definitely push against. It's like fake fasting and fake praying. We do not do those things. And it is something that we feel like is, it's just like good etiquette. These are not within our Islamic big principles to do, right? Find another way to share, communicate with others in a respectful way, or privately go and eat, or privately remove yourself from the room when prayer is happening. But to fake praying and to fake fasting is actually like one lying, and also just what is the purpose, especially the fake praying, right? I understand what the purpose is we're unable to communicate about certain things, but we should not be doing that. But definitely break the fast, and privately if you feel more comfortable that way. Okay. All right, we've covered this. If you fast all day and your period starts a few minutes before Maghrib, if it's morning and you have not ghusled, you can still fast that day if you are pure. Do not pretend you are fasting. I have a note right there. Do pregnant and breastfeeding women have to fast? We talked about all of the different opinions. Okay. All right. Yes.
Better makeup.
To be honest, it's 3 separate opinions that she only makes it up because that's the ruling for everyone. She just has to make up the fast. She makes it up and pays the fidya is like the most it's doing the most, but also the least strong opinion, because why would you do both? Right? Fidya is the idea that you really don't have the capabilities of making this up. Right? Like the terminally ill, the chronically ill, they don't fast the 30 days, they pay the fidya because they don't expect to even be able to make it up in the next 11 months. If the pregnant and nursing woman feels like she's under that category, I won't be able to make it up over the next 11 months because I'll still be pregnant and nursing. And, I don't know what that's going to look like. Then she goes ahead and pays the fidya. To pay the fidya and to make it up, you're double, you're doing double, but it is an opinion of some of the scholars, I guess, to be safe. But I do know some scholars who are like, why are we even sharing that opinion when you're doing double?
Questions from my sister. Recently started. So she didn't realize she had to make it up. Her kids are like now 7 and 4.
Okay.
Her question was, does she now make a niyyah and then make up her fast for the 2 pregnancies? No breastfeeding, she just had the pregnancy.
Yeah.
Does she make up the fast and make a niyyah and then continue her fast?
Okay, so it's case by case basis. If we take 2 years of Ramadan, so we got 60 days about, right? If a person feels like that's something doable, they look at their health situation, they look at where they're at, where they're at in terms of are they going to be pregnant and nursing for the next couple of years? If they find themselves with the capacity to make up 60 fasts, it doesn't have to be made up by the next Ramadan. It can be made up slowly over the course of time, right? If this was a different scenario and she was still in a age where she was still having children regularly and there were a couple of years, then the scholars may say, why not take the minority opinion and just pay the fidya? Yeah. I'm saying 60 is doable. She knows better what's doable for her. The minority opinion just says, go ahead with the fidya and don't worry about the makeup.
Now you need to know.
Yeah.
And then now you're at a point where you can't fast, so now you would rather live.
Yeah.
Would
That's a great question. The fasts that were missed during a time where you were able to fast need to be made up, but you yourself are still alive. I really have to think about this or research more into it. My first answer would be to pay fidya on whatever has been missed. And then I would have to research further to see what to be done about the ones in the past. Technically, you can't. You technically can't, and nobody can make up fast on your behalf while you're still alive. So my only conclusion is the fidya, right? People would only make up fast on your behalf when you were healthy after your death, and you don't want to wait for that because that's a debt, and a debt is not a good thing to pass away with. So I would imagine that fidya is the only option if that's the only option you have. Yeah, and then asking for forgiveness for those missed ones.
So that's specifically regarding like you can make it over time of the pregnancy. A lot. But I remember you started off with if you had period but what if you didn't know that you had to pay if you didn't like fast throughout? Because like I've had many years of missed fast and I never actually knew that you had to make up before the next Ramadan until like maybe a year or two ago, and then it's like, okay, but I have like a lot to make up. Like, and so at this point, like I am like trying to make them up, but slowly, but I definitely like I haven't like scheduled it before the next Ramadan. So like, is it okay to pay fidya and continue to like make up the fast then for like all those missed ones?
So to reiterate the question, someone who not because of pregnancy or not because of breastfeeding has a lot of years of makeup fasts that were not paid fidya for by the next year, what can be done? This is where that pay fidya and make them up makes sense. It's for those who recognize that I have passed a boundary that I was not supposed to pass, and I'm gonna go ahead and pay the fidya, but I also will, because this is something I can make up, I'm not chronically ill, I do need to make it up. And so it does cover both bases. And that's why I was gonna say, personally, that's what I do, right? When I knew that I had missed 30 days of Ramadan because of pregnancy, and by the next year rolling around, I might have not finished all of them, and I was nursing, I just went ahead and paid the fidya and intended to make it up later, right? Because at that point I was like, well, I can't, but I know in the future I can. So let me, before the next Ramadan, go ahead and pay the fidya. And then before the Ramadan after that, I again paid the fidya and then started making them up after. So the fidya is typically for someone who's chronically or terminally ill or old, elderly, that they'll never be able to make it up, or it's a penalty for not having made it up in the 11 months. So you see, where do you fall in that category? Yes.
Maybe, obviously, it's a question, but, because I work with a lot of patients with diabetes and I'm managing them. So I've had patients, most of the patients ask me, they're on that weekly injection for appetite suppression, like Ozempic and all of that. And I know like Fiqh-wise, insulin cannot be administered during periods of fast. But they're asking, well, technically, a week-long injection stays in the body for that amount of time. Does that interact, or does that, am I allowed to do it, or I don't want to do it? I don't know if you would know, or if that's something you need to look into, but just out of curiosity, is there a situation, or would there be a situation where that would be appropriate?
Okay, that's a great question. And the scholars spoke about, and this is more of a Sheikh Abdullah question, but I have some in the notes here of what breaks the fast and what does not break the fast. So the scholars mentioned anything that reaches the stomach or the brain that enters through any of the passages, meaning the mouth, the nose, or the private parts, right? They've also mentioned in that injections that are nutritious, right, in nature, like an IV, but not injections that are medicinal, right? So where does the insulin fall is probably where the scholars might differ in their opinion. But typically, if it's a nutritious injection, then it is filling your body with it has nutritious effects, which is the opposite of what the fast is supposed to do. But if it is an injection for, the flu or for other sorts of viruses or whenever I start talking about medical stuff, I say all the wrong words, but you have a non-nutritious injection, that's okay. That's okay to take that injection if need be during the fast, but not an IV. So the answer is I'm not really sure what the insulin injection would be categorized as.
Okay.
Yeah. But since we're on that category, here are some of the things that do absolutely break the fast that we haven't really usually thought about. Smoking, we understand breaks the fast, but the scholars even said inhaling bukhur. Have you ever considered that? Right? So if smoking's not allowed, why? Because it is this substance that goes in and you inhale it and it comes and it sort of satiates the body. Inhaling bukhur is similar, right? This is like talking about the person who puts bukhur in their home and stands by it and goes. On that same note, Vicks, right? If you're getting like a Vicks that's steaming and it's going, where does it go? It goes internal through the nose, through the throat, and you start tasting it, right? These are all not allowed during the fasting hours, right? During the fasting hours.
And what about smelling food if you're cooking? Like, you have to.
Smelling food when you're cooking. So
Usually we do this to make sure.
here are the things you have to be careful. Even tasting food while cooking is considered permitted. So smelling would be fine, so long as think of the effect of what happens when you're inhaling Vicks. You don't want that to be had when you're cooking. So if you're sitting around, you're right, there's that style. What's it called?
Yeah.
Wafing?
Yeah, wafting, yeah.
Okay, there's wafing. And then there is sitting right in front of the pot and the smell comes, it enters your nose, you taste it in the back of your throat. This has now officially invalidated the fast. Of course, if you knew, right? You knew you were doing that and you did it, that's not okay. Tasting, the Prophet ﷺ said it was fine. A woman asked my husband, it's kind of like picky about food and how do I make sure it's okay when I'm fasting? And he said, just take a taste on the tip of your tongue and then spit it out, because it doesn't reach to the back of the throat. But inhaling can even reach to the back of the throat, and we know that. That's why even things like eye drops and nose, the nasal sprays are considered problematic and possibly breaking the fast if they're going to go and make it through to your throat, right? They're going to make it through to your throat. So the scholars have differed. They said if it reaches the throat, nose drops and eye drops are not permitted, right?
Like, what about people who wear contacts for and they're putting their contacts on after, Fajr comes in?
That is a great question. And let's see. There we go. Eye drops and eardrops are debated. So there's a difference of opinion amongst the scholars.
The good practice is to maybe, if you want to stay away from it, put it on before Fajr starts.
Yes. So somehow, nose drops got in the category of absolutely breaks the fast. And if anyone's not nose drops, the nose like sprays, you definitely, it's like it's the same as drinking a medicine. You feel it go up your nose and you feel it trail down your throat all the way, and it's a really gross taste, right? Because eye drops and eardrops are not typically done in that same way, and they're just a small amount, and they don't typically always reach the back of the throat. That's why they're debatable. Some who say to stay away from it altogether, and others who say no, that it's not in the same category as nose drops.
What about like toothpaste and brushing?
So toothpaste comes under the same category of there are those with ihtiyat, a lot of caution, who say don't brush your teeth. They just say just use the miswak, for example. But the majority will say toothpaste is fine, because if tasting is okay, then you're tasting it and throwing and spitting it out. Yeah. So you'll get that category of folks who say all of these things are not allowed. You'll find that a lot of those things are not allowed because they might lead to you swallowing something. So you'll even hear that people say swimming is not allowed during Ramadan. Swimming is allowed, or taking a bath or taking a shower is allowed, so long as you're not deliberately or you're being more careful to not inhale through your nose or through your mouth any type of water, right? So just we do need to know like the bare bones of the fiqh, and then you can also understand why those who are more cautious say what they say, but you also have to know, well, we don't have a hadith that says swimming's not allowed. We don't have a hadith that says they didn't take ghusl while they were in a state of fasting. We even have the case where the Prophet ﷺ did. It was just, be careful. Don't swallow water. Don't inhale water. Don't do anything that's going to cause you to be in that category of that liquid or food or something you have consumed has entered one of the orifices, because now you come under the category of invalidated.
So miswak would be allowed on the
By spitting out because miswak also has a flavor within the branch itself. So you'll find those who say let's stay away from it, and those who say no. Miswak, the Prophet ﷺ said, if it was not so hard on my ummah, I would have made miswak obligatory, right? And truly, like, it's a good way to keep our breaths nice during the fast, even though Allah loves the breath, right? Allah loves the breath of the one who is fasting. So pungent as it may be, Allah loves it because you're sacrificing all of that for his sake. But if you wanted to use the miswak, yes, just be careful of spitting out any of the taste that comes from it. You can also get really dry miswaks. Like, you've been using that miswak for a while now, it has no flavor or taste, and it's just your own saliva.
So bleeding outside of the menses, right? Say for example, you get a cut or you scrape something or fall down, start bleeding. Is there a point where it invalidates your fast or breaks your fast?
Okay. Wait, but I might not know the answer here.
Uh,
Yeah, now this is definitely a Sheikh Abdullah question. So the prayer, wudu is broken by an amount of blood that flows that's typically bigger than the size of a coin, right? But if you happen to have just like a small paper cut and it's not flowing, then your wudu is not broken, okay? As for fasting, I don't see it on the list, so I have all the lists of what breaks, what does not break, and then what's debatable. I do not see blood, like a cut breaking the fast. However, hijama and giving blood are considered problematic in this era, right? Hijama, which is cupping, and giving blood in this time is they're actually both debatable. Some say a small amount is okay, and others say no. Some Sahaba still did do hijama while fasting. The Prophet ﷺ also did say in one point that no, you should not. So I guess on that point, a small amount would not. And if there's a big amount, I guess you have to ask yourself, what's going on? Are you probably like sick enough that you might faint? If we're talking about a lot of blood.
What I was gonna say is that I'm guessing the excessive bleeding is for the fact that it will make you sick, and then you fall under the category of illness and sickness, and then therefore you can break your fast, or you choose not to if you think you're not gonna be ill.
Yeah, I think that's a good marker. Is a little bit of blood would not invalidate your wudu. A little bit of blood would not invalidate your fast. Enough blood that you're about to faint or become sick, you are already invalidate. Your fast is allowed to be broken for the fact of being ill. So if hijama is allowed according to some, or it's debatable, and giving or receiving blood is allowed a little bit according to some, then that means some blood is okay and a lot of blood is we shouldn't just be like, am I fasting or not? I should be like, am I okay or not? Like, what is happening in my body that there is so much blood coming out? That should be the very first thing. And if you're feeling ill, then go ahead and break it. Acupuncture.
It doesn't really cause blood, but it runs a needle.
So let's see, what reaches the belly or the brain that enters through any of the cavities, mouth, nose, or the private parts. And so technically it doesn't look like it falls under that category. Let's see, it would also be just a small amount of blood, and it's not entering into the body and giving it any, you're not consuming anything, right? That's why it's important to understand like the base foundation rules, because with the base foundation rules, you can understand that an injection is okay, because it's not entering the belly or the brain for any nutritional, or it's not a consumption of anything. Whereas an IV drip, even though it's not entering the mouth, it is still giving nutrition, and that's problematic. That's why nose drops, definitely you can taste them, you're consuming something, whereas maybe an ear drop, maybe it's entering through, but there's no consumption of anything in most cases, unless it's severe and you're getting a lot of medication through the ear. So smoking and inhaling bukhur, suppositories and enemas are not allowed because they enter through the private, through the private parts. Nutritious injections like IVs would not be allowed. Deliberate vomiting, vomiting that is not deliberate would be okay. You just have to ask, am I sick? Right? Should I break the fast? But say, for example, you have acid reflux, you have a little bit of involuntary vomiting, it doesn't break the fast. You should spit that out. You shouldn't try to consume that again. You should spit it out, but your fast is still valid. Deliberate vomiting would be problematic and considered an invalidation of the fast, right? Yes.
Delayed release.
Good question. Kind of like
Take them during suhoor and then like it gives you.
a good question. So you consumed something beforehand. Yeah, the truth is I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud. And what was his answer?
He said, take it.
Take it. Okay. Yeah. So what your body does, I mean, the reality is I could say that about a lot of foods, right? Oh, you know, consume this kind of food, and then it says, well, that takes 7 hours to go through your system.
Eating more protein during suhoor also.
Yeah.
So,
So if you go to the base rule again, is it entering the mouth, the nose, or the private part? And it is something you consume during the fast. Caffeine pills, if you take it before sahur, that's not entering the mouth, nose, or private part, and it's not something you're consuming during the fast, then it's okay. Man, that's why Sheikh Joe said yes. He said take it because that's smart. That's fine.
He's saying that what if you swallow your spit because your throat is too dry?
Yeah,
Kind of like
your spit is good. Your spit is good. Your spit is okay. Here's you know, something to be wary of is even the scholars talked about making wudu and the water and the snuffing of the nose to be so careful, because sometimes you gotta like think about your intention there. Like, as I'm drinking, right, Allah forgives the mistake. That is absolutely a mistake. But there is sometimes intentionality in our mistakes. So I'll give you an example. In high school, all the time, I'd forget. I'd pass by that water fountain, and I'd drink a sip, and I'd be like, I'm fast. Okay. And you know what I would say is, thank you, Allah. That's what the Prophet ﷺ said. For someone who unintentionally ate or drank during their fast, that is a rahmah from Allah. It is really just a mercy from Allah. But intentionality breaks the fast. So I pass by, I see the water fountain, and I'm like, my throat's really dry and I'm fasting and it really hurts. And so I take a sip and I spit it out. But in the back of my mind and in the back of my throat, I feel that drop, and I'm like, that's intentionality. Like, that felt really good, but hey, Allah will forgive. No, intentionality is very important there. So that's why the scholars say being very careful when you make that wudu, that you are conscious of making wudu and what's going on in your mind at that time. Oh, I'm so thirsty. I wish I could drink this. Oops. No. But okay, I'm just making wudu. I'm making wudu. Oh no, a drop fell. Very different. Intention makes a difference there. I remember Allah knows. That's the answer. Allah knows, right? Allah knows what's in your mind. So if you're like, did it break? Did it not? You know the answer, and that answer is sitting in your mind, right? And if you're unsure, then go ahead and make up that fast. I remember like at age 6, like running into my room with the Tootsie Rolls and undoing them and eating them during iftar time. Like I knew, even though nobody else knew, I knew that I was breaking my fast before iftar. So you got to ask yourself, like, what's going on in your mind when you're drinking, when you're taking those sips to just alleviate the dryness? What's the intention inside? Look, again, if it happens by mistake, it's by mistake. But intentional, it breaks the fast. Okay. yeah, using toothpastes as long as you don't swallow it. Ibn Abbas talked about tasting the food, but the scholars definitely discourage it. It shouldn't be something you do just for fun. It should be for a reason. Scholars talked about asthma air pumps, which is really interesting. They have typically allowed it, which is interesting. And if you think about it, it's not really consumption, and it's not something for nutritional value. So it's actually one of those things in the gray area where some scholars will probably say no, but the majority have looked into it and understood that this is permitted. That it would be kind of similar to going into a really hot room that's very humid, and then you tasted the air, that,
She takes,
yeah.
is it okay, like, I'm fasting shallow in the day, but, she's starting to take it now because her cough.
Yeah.
She can take maybe twice during her fast.
Yeah,
That's
this,
okay.
the majority of scholars have allowed asthma air pumps in general, but not any medication taken in another way that it is consumed, like capsules or anything that helps asthma during the fast. Okay. Yeah, like I said, there's not too much connected to women's fiqh related to Ramadan. So if you guys have any more questions. Yes.
Sorry, they don't want to ask questions.
Okay.
Even though they know you. So she wants to know, why do women not pray during period?
That's a good question. Okay. Allah says in the Quran, وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْمَحِيضِ قُلْ هُوَ أَذًى. And they ask you about the one who is menstruating. Say it is a harm. So that is one of the first things that when we are talked about hayd, when we are told about hayd in the Quran, Allah is not saying it is an impurity, but he doesn't say it is an impurity. He doesn't say they are dirty in that time, say all these things, right? We know from a fiqh perspective, it is an impurity, and that's why she does not fast. And that is why she does not, or she does not pray. We can understand that. But it is also a state of harm that may be caused upon her, right? Meaning it is something that Allah has ordained for the daughters of Adam, but within it comes some difficulty. And for those of us who, alhamdulillah, don't have a lot of difficulty, that's hard to understand. But for those of us, and let's say 50% or more of women who feel pain, feel the cramps, and feel the exhaustion, and feel the fatigue, and those who are on that other end of the spectrum where they're like bedridden for those days, because the majority feel some sort of pain, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said, say it is a harmful thing. Say it is something that is harmful and it causes pain. And so we can think of it from a physical perspective. Allah is saying, okay, with impurity, you cannot make wudu and therefore pray. But then it also connects to the fast. So it's got to be more than just impurity, right? Because you don't have to have wudu to fast, right? So there is also something else going on outside of just the physical impurity. And from that, we recognize perhaps Allah is trying to be merciful to the daughters of Adam, that in this time when there's a lot of difficulty, you are not given extra obligations on your plate, like waking up for Fajr, staying up all the way till Isha, and you are not being obligated to fast when maybe your body is already ridden with some difficulties and ailments from the period. So it truly is a physical experience, and it has its physical impurity connected to it. But the connection to fast helps us recognize it's not all about, she doesn't do this and that because she's impure, right? She doesn't do this and that because Allah said it's something painful, and he's perhaps giving us a break. He's being merciful to us. Now, I will absolutely agree that there are times where you're like, man, I really wish I didn't have my period, right? When we're on Umrah, it's the last 10 nights of Ramadan. But that's actually a good opportunity to talk about what can and cannot be done. We talked about it a little bit in the Fiqh of Menses class last time. Actually, we talked about it for the entire session, but I'll just reiterate some of those things. Last 10 nights of Ramadan, or any of these 30 nights of Ramadan, your period comes, or you're in a state of nifas, postpartum bleeding. Yes, question.
What if I'm at school and it's fast?
If you're at school and you're fasting and you get your period, you break your fast. And that day doesn't count for the obligation for you. So you haven't, you have to make up that day after Ramadan. But inshallah, you get reward because you tried your best, right? You tried your best to fast as much of the day as possible. But that day officially ends for you for fasting. You can break your fast, drink water, eat food, and make that one day up after Ramadan is over, before the next Ramadan comes. Okay, so when it comes to some of the things you are allowed to do or not allowed to do during the menses, we're not allowed to fast. Okay, we got that. But does that mean you're not allowed to be in the masjid? So the scholars disagree. The majority of scholars say a woman who is on her menses should not be in the masjid. There's a minority that say as long as she's not standing in the rows of prayer, right? Disrupting the actual rows of prayer, the women praying, when the iqama is called or when the prayer is being done, then she can stay in the back. Why? Because there are some evidences where the Prophet ﷺ, he appointed a woman to be the keeper of the masjid, Mihjan. And so she would take care of the masjid all of the time, regardless of what was going on with her body, right? She was not told, be the caretaker of the masjid, but stay away during your period. There was also a woman who was a freed slave who was given a tent that she was able to live in the masjid on her own. So typically the men lived in the masjid. They were known as Ahl al-Sufa, the men who didn't have homes, they didn't have their actual homes. They wanted to live in the masjid. But in this case, a woman was given a tent that she could put up, and she could live, a certain amount of time till she was able to find her next location accommodation. So she was able to live in the masjid. In neither of these cases, Mihjan, the caretaker, or the woman who's given the masjid as a home, they were not told, and leave the masjid during your menses. Also, the argument is that if it was so certain that women could not be in the masjid during their menses, we would have had multiple ahadith where women asked and they were told no. But we actually only have one hadith, and that is labeled as da'if. And that's not to say every da'if hadith is just thrown out, but the ruling in Islamic fiqh is if you're trying to make a ruling of halal and haram, it can't be based on a da'if hadith alone. A da'if hadith, a weak hadith, can be a supplement to something authentic. But there's no authentic narration that a woman cannot be in the masjid during that state. In fact, there's the ayah in the Quran that says a man or a woman in a state of janaba, sexual impurity, should not go into the masjid unless passing by. You need to grab something or get something. But it doesn't talk about the woman in her state of menses. And so that's even a stronger argument that would have been the opportunity that it was mentioned. These are the two people who shouldn't be in the masjid. But in fact, only the person in a state of sexual impurity, so after intercourse, before they make ghusl, should not enter into the masjid except for passing by. And the hadith that is the weak hadith puts both of those together. It says a person in a state of sexual impurity and a person in a state of menses should not enter the masjid until they have ghusl. And that narration is considered da'if. For whatever reason, it's considered da'if. And there's no strong enough evidence to push to make it a higher ruling. Those who, since it is true though that the majority disallow it, because they look at that ayah and they say, by analogy, the person who is in a state of janaba, sexual impurity, is like the woman who is in a state of menses. And they say that analogy is sufficient enough. It's an ayah in the Quran that's obviously authentic. We made an and we have a weak hadith to prop it up. The rebuttal from the minority is that's not an analogous situation. Right? And we talked about it in the last class. Analogy means that two things have to be similar in a very specific way, right? Like alcohol is haram, therefore marijuana is haram, THC is haram, because they're both intoxicating, right? A person should not go into the masjid in a state of janaba because it's a state of janaba, sexual impurity. Is that the same as a woman who should not go in the state of menses? It's not a state of sexual, it's a state of impurity. If the case was absolutely about purity and not, then you shouldn't be able to enter the masjid without wudu even, right? So is purity the thing? No, it was a state where that was disallowed. And so they say there's just not enough connection between these two to consider them analogous. One is a state that a person, janaba, sexual impurity, you can voluntarily get into and voluntarily get out of, but menses is something that Allah has ordained for you. And you can't just get out of it when you want to. It's only done when it is ordained to be done. So there was enough difference for them to say, we can't say this is an analogous situation, and therefore analogy cannot be made. So the minority allow for a woman to enter the masjid. On top of that is the hadith of Aisha radiallahu anha when she was going for Hajj. They were going to do Umrah for Hajj with the Prophet ﷺ, and her menses comes. And so the Prophet ﷺ in an authentic narration says, go ahead and do, first he says, this is something Allah has ordained for the daughters of Adam. So he's giving her a consolation, like it's not your fault. It's not like Allah is unhappy with you and gave you this. He's just letting her know it's ordained. It's what happens. 2, go ahead and join us and do everything with us, but avoid the tawaf, which meant she was coming to the Kaaba with them. What can she do in that state? She can sit in the rows behind the people praying, and she can make dua. She can listen to the recitation of the Quran if they're going to recite anything or pray any prayers. She was even permitted to be in the site for sa'i. She was just not permitted the tawaf in addition to the prayer. So if it truly was the case that she should just be far away from, the rest of the crowd, she would have been told, okay, this is something that's ordained for you. Go ahead and stay in the caravan until we're done with all. Right? But she was told, come and join us, just avoid the tawaf. So this is the strongest evidence that she's permitted to be in that space. She just needs to, remove herself from the place of prayer. Because the Prophet ﷺ also said during Eid prayer, he said, call everyone, you're menstruating and non-menstruating, you're old and you're young. Just tell the women to leave the menstruating women to not be in the rows of prayer. That's what he said. So using all of these ahadith together, they sort of constructed this narrative that the strength of the argument against women being in the masjid is just not there, and there's so much more strength in she's allowed to be there and benefit from what the masjid has to offer, so long as she's not sitting and blocking the rows of prayer and within the rows of prayer when they are praying, and Allah knows best. So this Ramadan, find yourself in the last 10 nights or the first 10 nights or the middle 10 nights in a state of menses, and you're unable to feel like you can benefit, take the minority opinion. And it is there is validity to it. It's actually the opinion of Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, which is Shaykh al-Islam, one of the greater scholars of a couple of centuries ago. And enjoy that recitation. Go to that qiyam prayer. Go and listen to the halaqah. Take your notes, and when they are praying, go to the back rows where nobody else is praying with the other women who are not praying. If it's Jumu'ah khutbah, go and listen to the khutbah and benefit from it and understand, the lesson that is being given, and remove yourself from the rows of prayer when it is prayer time, or even from the beginning. I always I sit myself at the back from the beginning if I'm not praying. It is not a means to punish women. It is not a means to make them further away from their Lord. We still have the ability to access our faith, our Quran, our community in these times. We just have to be aware of some of the small logistical changes we have to make in those cases. And if it truly was about impurity, this is one more argument, is that there was a woman who was in a state of istihada, where she was always continuously bleeding. And this is kind of like, the imagery is kind of strong here to share, but it's important to share. This is in the narrations, that she bled so much that she would bleed through whatever was given to her in terms of cotton, that the Prophet ﷺ ordered or asked for them to bring a metal tray that she could sit on when she is in the masjid, so that she can still be in the masjid with them, despite the fact that there was so much in her istihada, in her state of bleeding, that it would even go through the cotton. So if it truly was an argument of purity or impurity, blood is typically impure, and like we've got to wash it off before we pray. But she was given this concession that, okay, you're in that state, that's okay, still join us. Let's take all the means that are needed for you to join us. And then in addition to that, can she recite Quran? Yes, that she can still recite. This is the majority have said, yes, she can still recite. This is like coming from your mouth, right? And can she touch is where the majority say she cannot. So can she, the mushaf, the physical mushaf? Yeah, I don't have one right here.
It's, I think,
It's on the book. Yeah, that right there, Fatiha to Nas, all Arabic. The majority opinion is nobody should touch it except for be purified. So in a state of wudu, should you only touch it? And specifically, some mention we're talking about the opening of the book and touching the Arabic words. So maybe I need to move this to the bookshelf without a state of wudu. It's okay. But if I want to take it, open it, and start reading it, I need to be in a state of wudu, which means if I'm in janaba, I need to get out of a state of a janaba, or if I'm in menses, I need to be out of the state of menses. The workaround that the scholars have mentioned is the iPad, your phone. These are not technically a mushaf. They are 100 different things, and they have words of the Quran on them. So you can go through the mushaf and you can read it, and you can touch the words on the iPad, and it's okay. The opinion of the more conservative folks are that you can still touch the iPad, but don't touch the words of the Quran. Like press the bottom button at the to press the page, right? And they're just being a little bit more cautious. And what proves that it's not the mushaf is this. Would you go into the restroom with the mushaf, holding a mushaf in your hand? No. But could you take your Quran on your phone, turn it off, pop it into your pocket, and walk into the restroom? Yes. So we agree it's not the mushaf. And so the scholars say it's not a mushaf. It is a device on which you may be able to recite some Quran. They've also mentioned that if you pick up a book that has some Quranic ayats and translation, that's still not a mushaf. It has to be Arabic, Quran, Fatiha to Nas. So if you happen to have like a Tafsir Ibn Kathir book, that's okay for a woman to touch on her menses. This is translation, tafsir, and some ayat of Quran. That's fine for her to touch. So there are so many things she can do. If we think about all the things she cannot do, then we start losing momentum. But remember, in Ramadan, keep up that momentum in just the slightly different ways she can do it. Even if it's not touching the iPad and you're touching the physical mushaf, then to have a barrier between her and the mushaf. All right, inshallah, we will conclude there. And if you guys have any questions, we'll take them. But I think we're good. Yes.
So I think the sister asked the question already, but just it's a lot of fast. Every single year you have to see that penalty for the fast that you missed, even though you don't remember how much you
My suggestion,
just like a one time.
it's fidya is a one-time thing.
Okay.
Yeah. So you missed 30 days, by the next Ramadan, you pay 30. If you've missed 100 days in many years, you can pay 100 in one go, and you don't have to repay for those again. Fidya is one-time payment for one day missed. And the scholars have also talked about someone who has a lot of fast makeup. You don't have to do the fidya immediately that moment, because that might be like $1,000 you do not have to give away. So you do like, okay, I'm gonna try to pay a couple hundred this year and a couple hundred in the next couple of years. But if you have the ability to, then the stronger opinion is make those up, right? And if you don't have the ability, then the fidya suffices.
You were getting Sha'wal.
Okay, so Sha'wal. I wanted to find my notes on Sha'wal.
So my only question before
Yes.
Can combine our mid fast and Sha'wal into one.
Yes, that is the debate, right? Okay, let me just open this up real quickly. I didn't have my Sha'wal notes for some reason, but yes, this video will be on Sohba Institute's YouTube page. Let's see, 6 Sha'wal. All right, there we go. Okay, so there are two opinions. Number one, you must finish your Ramadan fast. Let me just explain what Shawwal is. So after fasting the 30 days of Ramadan, Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, whoever fasts Ramadan and follows it up with 6 fasts in Shawwal, which is the month after Ramadan, then it is if they have fasted an entire year, right? And so everyone wants to get that benefit. You got that momentum. You want to do 6 more. So these 6 Shawwal are optional, right? They're sunnah, but they have a lot of reward. So the question is, can I do my 6th Shawwal in the month of Shawwal and then fast Ramadan makeups throughout the next several months? Or do I have to make up all of my Ramadan fasts because those were fard, and then I can make up my 6th of Shawwal, and that's the only way I can do 6th of Shawwal? Or can I combine the intention that this 1 of Shawwal is my 1 makeup from Ramadan, and this 2 of Shawwal is my 2nd makeup of Ramadan? Okay, so the first opinion is you must finish your Ramadan fast first. I think that's understandable for those who said it is. They said obligatory is more important than the sunnah. This is the opinion amongst those who hold this opinion is the Hanbalis, the Hanabila. So they say that you have to finish your obligatory. It is the obligation, right? And if you passed away, you have a debt for not making up those fasts, and you don't have a debt for not making up Shawwal. Okay. They also said linguistically, the words say of the hadith, whoever fasts Ramadan and follows it up with 6 of Shawwal. So they say, so you got to finish your Ramadan so you can follow it up with 6 of Shawwal. Okay. They also give this, where they give this sort of leniency, as they say you try to make up your Ramadan fast. Maybe I got 10. Okay, so I go right after Ramadan, I make up my 10 obligatory. I'm taking the Hanbali opinion. Then I do my 6 of Shawwal, and I'm like, 6 of Shawwal, I'm almost there. And then my period comes, and I can't make it up. I can't make up all 10 and do all of 6 Shawwal with my 10 days of menses that are about to come up. It's just not going to work out. The numbers don't work out for me. They say then you can continue to make up do your 6 of Shawwal after your menses has ended, even if it's in the next month of the Qa'dah. So that's the leniency that they give. Okay. The next opinion is, yes, you can do your 6 Shawwal before the makeups of Ramadan. And this is the opinion of the Hanafi, Shafi'i, and Maliki madhab. And the answer, the reason they give this answer is because they said, Allah has given you 11 months to make up Ramadan. So why are we narrowing it down? Allah has given us 1 month to do Shawwal, right? The amount he's given is something we need to take into consideration. Let's not narrow that down. Also, the hadith of Aisha radiallahu anha, where she said, I used to make up all of my obligatory fasts in Sha'ban. And they said, did we then expect that Aisha never did Shawwal or never did Ashura or never did any of the voluntary fasts? In fact, we know she did, right? She would talk about, Ya Rasulullah, I'm fasting, and why'd you break the fast in certain voluntary days, right, where they were traveling? And so it's known that Aisha did voluntary fasts, even though she had not made up Ramadan, and she always made up Ramadan the month before Ramadan came. So that argument is to say that it's okay to do voluntary fasts because they're given specific amounts of time, right? 6 days of Shawwal, or 1 day of Ashura, or 1 day of Arafah, whereas Ramadan is given a wide amount of time. So do not narrow what Allah has made wide. Okay. And then there is the majority, it's only a minority of scholars who say you can combine Shawwal and Ramadan fasts. But the majority say it is not allowed. And the argument is this: can Sunnah and Fard be combined in other things? Is there something else where Sunnah and Fard are combined? So, for example, you get up to pray Fajr and you're like, this is my 2 Sunnah Fajr and my 2 Fajr combined. Can you do that? So they said, if we don't have that allowance in any other obligation, say, for example, I say, this is my 2.5% zakah, and this is my provision for my family. Like you can't do that. First of all, you're not allowed to do that, right? But you can't combine two things into one. But the argument against that is there are times where you can combine 2 into 1. For example, say you wanted to make up a Ramadan fast. I got 5 Ramadan fasts to make up. And it also happens to be a Monday. And I say, Prophet ﷺ said, let's fast Mondays and Thursdays. So why am I fasting Monday? Because it's a Sunnah day to fast. And why am I fasting this day? Because it's an obligatory fast to make up. And nobody has a problem with that we make up the fast. And we've done it on a Sunnah day, hoping for more reward. So because there's that allowance and because there's that disallowance for combining fajr, sunnah, and obligations, the scholars differ. Some say fard and sunnah can be combined into one, and others say fard and sunnah have to be separate entities made up separately, done entirely separately. And Allah knows best. It's a minority opinion who allows both to be done. Personally, I make up, and I always say personally, and it doesn't matter what I do personally, but I'll just share. Personally, I do my 6 of Sha'wal, voluntary fast, and then throughout the year, I am making up Ramadan. And if we're being honest, I'm making them up in Sha'ban. All right, with that, inshallah, we'll conclude. I really thought we didn't have a lot, but we had a lot. Alhamdulillah. We had some good questions. Thank you all for asking your questions. Jazakumullahu khairan. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم. May Allah, Allahumma balighna Ramadan. Allah, oh Allah, please allow us to reach Ramadan. Oh Allah, allow this to be a Ramadan that we are able to gain so much barakah from all of its days and nights. Oh Allah, allow us to be healthy enough and be in a good state of our bodies to be able to fast and do this for your sake. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. Oh Allah, help those who do not have any food to break their fast, to alleviate their pain and their suffering, and to give them food and to give them ease in their difficulties. Ameen, ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. Oh Allah, let not this Ramadan pass except that we have been written amongst the people of Jannah, and that we are amongst those people who are forgiven for our sins, and we are amongst those people who our parents are happy with us and pleased with us. Ameen, ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. Inshallah, with that we will conclude. Please get some food, and since we had a couple new folks in, I think it would just be nice to introduce